Brickerville, Pennsylvania. We are here at the Coleman Memorial Chapel, as promised, here along Route 501. This is a chapel that was done in memorial for a James Coleman. He was the 14-year-old son of George Dawson Coleman and Deborah Coleman. He had been killed in that horseback riding accident in 1874. They wound out laying the cornerstone in 1874, not long after, and it was finished and completed in 1877. It's made of red sandstone, really beautiful building. And George Dawson Coleman actually passed away, I believe, in 1878, so shortly after it was completed. And Deborah Coleman, I believe, lived till 1894. They had the architect that built this and designed it was Luther Simon from Harrisburg. He actually went over to Europe to look at designs. The Colemans were very much, they knew what they wanted aesthetically for these different buildings that they built. And there's one of the houses that's here on the property. There's another one on the other side, but it's this red sandstone, mined or quarried locally. But it was one of those things, my friend Jared and I were talking yesterday about the Coleman family. They're one of those families that they're really, back in the early 1800s, were one of the most famous families in America, and they're largely, in a lot of ways, forgotten. I mean, besides this Coleman Memorial Chapel, the Coleman Chapel that we visited in Lebanon, that's going down to E-Town, and like Coleman's Park, there really is not a whole lot that's left that's memorialized to them with their namesake. And it's a shame, because really the general area owes a lot to the Coleman family for everything that they've done. There are a lot of buildings, a lot of churches that still exist, a number of towns that have their names because of the Colemans. You know, Cornwall really got built up because of the Coleman family and all the work they did. And we'll go around to the other side here, but we had talked about it as well, and I said it's just sort of one of those things that's, you think about the Colemans, and see there, you can see the date stone. I'll show you, is the cornerstone. It says 1874 there for you. Hopefully you can see that pretty well. But they really, like, you know, you talk about sometimes this is a beautiful view through here. Just look how beautiful that is. But they really experienced quite a bit of tragedy as well, sort of seemed to follow them. You know, they weren't doing anything bad. It was just things like James Coleman. You know, it was a freak horseback riding accident, and you know, at 14 years old, lost his life. There's a line in Lord of the Rings that Theoden says. He's like, no parent should have to bury their child. And that's got to be, I would think, the hardest thing for anybody to go through, is to have to bury their child and just have something like that happen, that there's just no rhyme or reason. There's another one of the buildings on the property here, but they definitely went through quite a bit. So we're going to go a little bit more into this. I'm going to get some pictures of the inside of the chapel. We're going to talk a little bit more about the history of George Dawson Coleman and his wife Deborah Coleman, because they're pretty intriguing people. But we're going to be doing a series at some point here on the Coleman family. We're doing that, you know, the Hometown Families series that we're starting up. We did on the Heilmans, on the Light family. We're going to do one on the Kreiders of Annville, and just some of these families that had a lot to do with molding these towns into what they are today. And these towns wouldn't be what they are today without these individuals. But the Coleman family are certainly well worth remembering, and we'll be doing a cool series on them, talking about all their ventures and go through the generations, starting with Robert Coleman, who was the Iron Baron, who wound up buying up Cornwall and all those other things from the Grubs, and just really is an intriguing guy. So we will go on to the next part of the video, and we'll see you here in a second. So let's delve a little bit further into the history of this amazing structure, the Coleman Memorial Chapel. Once again, it stood as a silent tribute to 14-year-old James Coleman, who was killed in an 1874 horseback riding accident. The Coleman family owned several iron furnaces in Lancaster and Lebanon County, and they already had a small stone building along what is now the Furnace Hills Pike to serve as a meeting place and a Sunday school for employees and their children. That was just something that the Colemans sort of did. They built that church in Cornwall, the United Methodist Church. They were very, very unique. A lot of industrialists, they were as cheap as they possibly could be when it came to taking care of their employees, their social needs, emotional needs, and all the other kind of stuff. Their physical needs certainly as well. The Colemans were very different in that regard. They not only built these places for their employees, but they aesthetically built beautiful buildings. Like they didn't hold back at all when it came to building something for other people. They went all out. They really truly cared about their employees. G. Dawson Coleman, George Dawson Coleman, and Deborah Brown Coleman were James' parents. They were prominent in northern Lebanon County. He was a third-generation heir from Robert Coleman to an iron business and he served in both the State House and Senate. Unfortunately, he would die 1878, like I had mentioned earlier in the video, just a year after the chapel was dedicated. She, however, Deborah lived till 1894. In Forest Leaves, an 1890 history by the American Forestry Association, the group praised Mrs. Coleman's dedication to forest preservation, saying that she possessed a competence of her own, and she truly went around doing good for charities serving Civil War veterans, churches, and hospitals. That's another thing that the Colemans were really well renowned for, is the care that they took for the people around them, not just for their employees, but just the general populace in general. It was really quite phenomenal. Jared and I were talking about, I don't know if it was George Dawson Coleman or if it was his brother Robert, but one of them wound out the area of Ebenezer, and I guess they call it the Independent Lebanon section, which was like the western, like northwestern section of Lebanon, and just shooting off of Lebanon, which is where Ebenezer is. They built the whole school system, all the buildings, all the churches in the area. He paid for everything. One of the buildings that we'll visit at some point right near Lights Fort is the Webster School. The Colemans, like I had said before, were a very famous family, and they were very close with Daniel Webster of the United States Congress. And his father's name was Ebenezer. So it's sort of not known for certain, but think that Ebenezer was named after Ebenezer Webster, after Daniel Webster's father. And the original school there in Ebenezer was built by the Colemans, the Webster Schoolhouse, I believe in like 1870s, 1880s in that general region. But they were extraordinary people, and as like I had said, is one of the things that was just sad about the family is they just seemed to have tragedy follow them around, and not doing anything wrong. It just seemed to follow them. I talked about in the Country Roads Take Me Home, I mentioned like the Roosevelts. They did so much good, and they just seemed to have these tragedies that sort of followed, and it's sad. Great triumphs, but also great tragedy. Now, who designed the chapel? They hired an architect, Luther Simon, from Harrisburg. He then traveled to Europe looking for the ideal design. The cornerstone was laid in 1874, and the final chapel was dedicated in 1877. There's a parsonage that's adjoining, and caretakers' houses were built at the same time, and those were some of the things that we showed. Simon also designed the State Arsenal and Pine Street Presbyterian, both in Harrisburg. They just really beautiful. What are some of the highlights? So there's a series of windows believed to be by the Tiffany studio. Once again, they did not hold back, and you can see in some of these pictures some of the lights and fixtures and things like that they thought
potentially were done by Tiffany. They didn't hold back in that regard. They made got the very best made for these different places, which is why they're so beautiful, and they really are treasures. And this building is, I believe, on the registry for Lancaster County. I don't know if it's on the national registry. I don't believe it is, but does have certain protections. As far as I know, it is non-denominational. The church still serves the community and reaches out, but that's the story of this church. Really a phenomenal building, beautiful building, and a lot of history there. And it's now almost 150 years that since the cornerstone was laid in 1874, and we're now in 2022, so just 2 years away from that. So they have done a lot of good in the community, a lot of good just in general, and it's just one of these places that Coleman's built in memorial to a tragedy, to the loss of their son, but also built for the community to help them to be able to have a place to worship and to help build society. So thank you once again, as always, for coming along and checking out another place of hometown history here at the Coleman Memorial Chapel. And as always, we will see you about town.